Yarden Nolan had never looked more out of place in his life than he did standing under a string of fairy lights in a vineyard surrounded by flower crowns and barefoot dancing cousins. "Why did I even agree to this?" he muttered, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored navy jacket. The soft hum of acoustic guitar and happy chatter filled the air, but none of it could distract him from mentally calculating what he was missing back in Manhattan deals, meetings, and a private jet waiting on standby. It was his cousin's wedding, someone he hadn't seen since childhood, and yet his mother had insisted. "You need a break, Yarden, maybe even meet someone who doesn't care about your bank account for once." He almost laughed. No one actually didn't care, at least that's what experience had taught him. He sipped his whiskey neat and scanned the crowd from the edge of the reception. Couples danced. People laughed. Women glanced over and smiled, but he was already turning away. He was ready to call his driver when something on the dance floor made him freeze. A woman alone was twirling barefoot in the middle of it all, completely lost in the music. No one else was dancing, just her. The song wasn't fast, but she moved like she didn't care, like the world wasn't watching, like it didn't matter. Her long brown hair whipped around her shoulders as she turned, her sundress catching the breeze. She didn't look drunk. She looked free, unbothered, and more importantly, she wasn't looking around for attention. Yarden couldn't take his eyes off her. "Who is that?" he asked his cousin's wife as she passed by. "Oh, that's Elara Hayes, childhood friend of the bride. She flew in from Oregon, sweetest person you'll ever meet, and totally single." Elara, he repeated the name in his head like it was something he needed to remember. He couldn't explain it, but something about her got under his skin fast. There was something about the way she moved, like no one had ever broken her, but life had tried. She finally stopped spinning. Her laughter echoed through the vineyard. It was unfiltered, real. Then, without warning, her eyes met his, and held. She tilted her head, curious, maybe even a little amused, and walked straight toward him barefoot. "You look like you hate it here," she said, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing tray and offering it to him. "You shouldn't wear that expression at a wedding," he blinked. "That obvious?" Painfully, she grinned, taking a sip from her own. "I'm Elara." "Yarden," he said, taking her hand. Her skin was warm. "Yarden," she repeated slowly. "That's a name you don't forget. Most people try to. I won't." Silence fell, but it wasn't awkward. It was charged. He couldn't remember the last time someone looked at him like he was just a man, not a walking investment portfolio. "So, are you close to the bride or groom?" he asked. "Bride, we grew up together. I used to braid her hair and secretly steal her Lisa Frank stickers," he laughed. Actually laughed. "That sounds criminal," she grinned. "And you, cousin of the groom, haven't seen him since we were kids. Yet here you are." "Yeah," he said, eyes still on hers. "Here I am." More music played and people started gathering on the dance floor again. Elara looked toward it, then back at him. "Dance with me," he blinked. "I don't dance, neither do I, that's why it's fun." And before he could say no, she took his hand and pulled him toward the floor. It should have been awkward, it should have felt forced. But it didn't. She didn't try to impress him. She just danced. She swayed, laughed, spun in circles, and kept her hand in his like it belonged there, and something strange happened. Yarden stopped thinking about his portfolio. About the hedge fund. About the private jet waiting for him. He forgot it all. Because she was right there, laughing in the moonlight, and for the first time in years, he didn't want to be anywhere else. After the song ended, they stepped off the dance floor, breathless. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" she teased. "I think you tricked me." "I absolutely did." He looked at her, really looked. "You're different," she raised a brow. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "Definitely a compliment." She smiled again, but this time it flickered like there was something underneath it she wasn't saying. Before he could ask, someone called her name, a friend wanting to take pictures before the night ended. "I should go," she said, stepping back. "Will I see you again?" he asked quickly. She paused, then shrugged. "That's up to fate, isn't it?" And with that, she disappeared into the crowd. Yarden watched her go, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He didn't even try to convince himself it was nothing, because it wasn't. He'd just met someone who made everything else feel small. and now he couldn't stop thinking about the woman dancing alone. Yarden hadn't planned on staying past the wedding brunch the next morning, but he found himself lingering on the edge of the vineyard's terrace, scanning faces under wide-brimmed hats and linen suits. A champagne flute sat untouched in his hand. She wasn't there. He had no logical reason to expect her to be. They hadn't exchanged numbers or made any promises. But something about the way she'd walked away last night didn't feel like goodbye. It felt unfinished, still here. His cousin's voice cut through the breeze, casual but knowing. Yarden didn't look at him. Flights got delayed. A man who owns a jet doesn't have flight delays. It's down for maintenance, right? He didn't say anything else. Neither did Yarden. They stood there until the groom was dragged away for another round of photos. And Yarden was left alone again with nothing but the memory of a barefoot girl who danced like the world couldn't touch her. By late afternoon, he'd had enough. He left a note for his mother, told the staff to pack his things, and headed toward the car. The driver opened the door, but he didn't get in. He stared at the empty rows of grapevines. Then he turned. "Take me into town." The driver hesitated. "Back to the airport?" "No." The town? It was a winding 20-minute drive into the heart of wine country, where the streets were lined with antique shops and hand-painted signs. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that sitting in silence wasn't enough. After walking past a bookstore, a pottery studio, and a cafe with mismatched chairs, he paused at the corner of a local craft market. Colorful booths stretched down the block, filled with handmade soaps, woven blankets, and wildflower bouquets. Then he saw her. Elara was behind a booth, tying twine around a glass bottle filled with dried lavender. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, a pencil tucked behind one ear. She wore an apron streaked with paint and clay, and she was laughing at something an older woman said as she handed her a wrapped bundle. She hadn't seen him. He stepped closer slowly. "So this is what fate looks like," her head snapped up. I thought I might find you spinning in another field," her mouth curved in surprise. "You came all the way down here for me. I didn't know I was going to." She wiped her hands on a cloth and stepped out from behind the table. "What are you even doing here? Don't you have, like, Manhattan things to get back to?" "Probably," he said. "But I couldn't stop thinking about you." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "You don't even know me." "I know enough to want to." She folded her arms, wary now. "Okay, let's say I believe that. What exactly are you expecting?" "I didn't come here with a plan. I just know I haven't felt this way in a long time, and I didn't want to leave without seeing you again." She studied him, eyes narrowed. "You're not used to chasing people, are you?" "Not really. And yet here you are." "Yeah," he said. "Here I am." Something in her softened. She reached behind her and pulled out a bottle from a crate. "Lavender oil, for stress. You look like you're allergic to relaxing." "I might be," he said, taking it. "Do you make everything here?" "Mostly. A few artists rotate the booth, but I run it most weekends." "You live here?" "Not exactly. I live in a town about 2 hours north. I just come down for markets. It's quiet, peaceful, which I'm guessing you're not a fan of." "I'm not sure what I'm a fan of anymore." She raised a brow. "That sounds like an expensive identity crisis." He laughed under his breath. "You're not wrong." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged again, but different this time, less unexpected, more inevitable. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "Where?" "Anywhere." "We'll walk." She hesitated, then untied her apron, handed the booth off to a girl nearby, and grabbed her jacket. "You're lucky I'm terrible at saying no to strange men in suits." "I'm not in a suit." "Yet somehow you still look like you should be yelling at someone in a boardroom." He grinned, and they started walking. The streets were quieter now. They passed a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and a record store with jazz humming from the open door. "So," she said after a while, "what's your story? And don't give me the polished dinner party version." He didn't answer right away. "I run a private equity firm, have for 10 years. I'm good at it. It's made me a lot of money. But I wake up most mornings wondering if any of it matters." She glanced over. "That's a lot of honesty for a second meeting. You said no polished version. Fair enough. What about you? I teach art classes at a community center. I freelance as a designer. I make things with my hands because it keeps me grounded, and because I've already done the corporate thing. What happened? My boss stole my work, passed it off as her own. I quit and never looked back. He looked at her impressed. That takes guts. I figured if I was going to be broke, I'd at least be happy. They rounded a corner and came to a stop in front of a park with a winding path and a small fountain at its center. Children chased each other across the grass. An older couple sat reading on a bench. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "Is that good?" "It's everything." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "You don't know me, Yarden. You know a version of me from one night. What happens when I stop surprising you? I think I'd still want to know what you're thinking, even if it's boring, especially then." She didn't laugh. She just looked at him long and hard, like she was trying to decide if he was real. Then she stepped closer. "I don't do casual," she said. "I don't do flings or distractions or whatever rich men are used to having between board meetings. I'm not looking for any of those things, and I'm not going to chase you. I wouldn't want you to." She nodded slowly. Okay, you can take me to dinner." His breath caught. "Tonight? I'm free at 6. He didn't try to hide his relief. "I'll pick you up." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Wear something that doesn't scream Wall Street. This town gets nervous around men with cufflinks," he laughed. "Noted." As she turned to head back to her booth, he stood there for a moment longer, watching her disappear into the crowd. For the second time in 2 days, he couldn't look away. Yarden stepped into the tiny restaurant Elara had suggested and immediately realized nothing about the place aligned with what he was used to. Mismatched wooden chairs, chalkboard menus with hand-drawn stars, a single guitarist strumming near the back, singing a soft, haunting folk tune. No maitre d', no host in a crisp blazer, just the scent of roasted garlic and lemon oil lingering in the air. Elara was already there, seated at a corner table by the window, wearing a rust-colored blouse and high-waisted jeans. Her sandals tapped lightly on the worn wooden floor as she stirred something in her glass. There was no trace of makeup, no showy jewelry. She didn't need either. She looked like the kind of woman who didn't try to capture attention and ended up commanding it anyway. He approached and she looked up, her mouth curving slightly not as a greeting, but more like she'd been expecting something else. "You clean up surprisingly well for someone who doesn't own a pair of jeans." "I borrowed a pair from my cousin," Yarden said, pulling out the chair across from her. "They're slightly too short and I hate them. You'll survive." "I'm not convinced." She passed him a glass of water. "They don't serve cocktails here. You okay with that?" "I can handle a dry dinner." "Good, the food's worth it." He looked around. "You come here often." "Only when I want to impress someone who thinks truffle oil is a food group." Yarden leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You always this sharp?" "Only when I'm a little nervous." That caught him off guard. "You're nervous?" "I don't go to dinner with people who walk like the sidewalk owes them something." He tilted his head. "You're not easy to impress." "I'm not interested in being impressed." The waitress arrived, and Elara ordered without glancing at the menu. Yarden deferred to her choice, unsure if he was making a mistake or trusting someone who clearly had no interest in pleasing him. As the waitress left, Elara folded her hands and regarded him carefully. "So what's the real reason you stayed past the wedding?" "I told you. I wanted to see you again." "Right, but why?" He didn't answer at first, then, "Because you don't look at me like you're calculating anything. And because when you danced alone, you didn't care who was watching. You think that means something? I think it means everything." She leaned her elbow on the table, chin resting on her hand. "You talk like someone who reads too much philosophy when he travels first class." "You're not wrong." The food arrived, a platter of roast vegetables, handmade pasta, and something involving lemon and capers that smelled like summer. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the soft clink of forks and the low hum of music. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork. "So what happens after this?" "You mean after dinner?" "I mean after this moment." After I go back to my life and you go back to your empire? Yarden didn't blink. I don't know yet. That's not an answer, it's the only one I have. She sat back. You're used to control, aren't you? Every part of my life depends on it, and I scare you a little because you don't have any with me. Yes, she didn't react. Just nodded once like she'd already known. You've had your heart broken, he said quietly. Everyone has. But you don't talk about it. There's nothing to say. I gave everything to someone who didn't know what to do with it. And I realized I'd rather be alone than misunderstood. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't offer platitudes, just let the truth settle between them. I've never had anything real, he said. I've had expensive dinners, staged smiles, and people who said all the right things until they got what they wanted. And what do you want? He didn't hesitate. Something that doesn't come with a contract. She looked at him for a long moment. I still don't trust you. I don't blame you, but I want to. That pulled something taut in his chest. Then let me earn it. Elara stood, grabbing her bag. Walk me home. He followed her out without a word. The night air was cool, the streets dim and quiet. They walked side by side, their steps unhurried. She didn't speak, and he didn't press. When they reached a quiet row of cottages with ivy climbing the walls, she stopped in front of one with a chipped blue door. This is me. He hesitated. Can I see you again? She looked at him like she was measuring the weight of his words. I don't want to be a temporary escape for someone trying to forget the noise of their real life. You're not, he said. You're the only thing that's felt real in a very long time. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. That's my number, but don't call me from a jet or a boardroom. Call me when you're somewhere quiet. Then she stepped inside, leaving him alone on the porch, her words echoing through him like a challenge he didn't know how badly he'd needed to take. Yarden stood in front of the cottage 3 days later, shifting his weight beneath the late afternoon sun. He hadn't called from a boardroom. He hadn't even gone back to New York. Instead, he'd rented a small guest house on the outskirts of town, canceled 3 meetings, and spent 72 hours trying to figure out why a woman he barely knew made every other priority fade to static. He raised his hand to knock. The door opened before he touched it. I knew it was you, Elara said, holding a paintbrush between her fingers, her other hand streaked in ochre and cobalt. You have a heavy step. You paint now. I always paint. You just haven't seen it. I want to. She studied him. You didn't call. I thought I'd come in person. I didn't say that was allowed. I was hoping you'd make an exception. You're full of those. He stepped inside before she could close the door. The scent of linseed oil and citrus lingered in the air, and the walls were lined with canvases, some half-covered, others bold and complete. One caught his eye. A woman standing in the middle of a field, barefoot, arms outstretched, head tilted toward a sky that wasn't quite blue. He turned to her. That's you. Not entirely. What's missing? The part that doesn't know where she belongs. Yarden crossed the room, careful not to step on scattered tubes of paint and brushes in jars. Maybe she does. Maybe she just hasn't admitted it yet. Is that what you came to say? No, he said, pulling something from his jacket pocket. I came to give you this. She took the envelope slowly. Inside was a printed invitation on thick paper, the kind that cost too much and didn't care who noticed. What is this? There's a charity gala in the city tomorrow night. I'm one of the board sponsors. I want you there. I don't belong at things like this. You belong wherever you want to be. She held the card like it was heavier than it looked. I don't have a dress. You will. I don't want to be a project. You're not. He stepped closer. You're the first thing I've wanted for no reason at all. Elara's eyes flicked to his. That doesn't sound like you. I'm not sure who I sound like anymore. The next evening, Yarden waited at the foot of the grand staircase of the Astorian, a restored mansion now serving as the venue for the gala. He wore a black tuxedo, hair slightly tousled from the wind, and tried not to look like he was scanning every incoming car. Then she stepped through the arched doors. Elara wore a deep plum gown with a satin sash tied low at the back. Her hair was half up, her makeup understated but striking. Even among the diamonds and designer gowns, she didn't look out of place. She looked like she'd rewritten the room's tone by simply entering it. "I don't think I can breathe," Yarden said as she reached him. "You planned that line ahead of time." "No." "But I wish I had." She glanced around at the chandeliers and polished marble. "Is this where you live when you're not pretending to be a normal person?" "I don't live anywhere until you show up." "That's dangerously close to romantic." "Good. Because I'm not asking you to pretend anymore." They moved through the crowd hand in hand, and for once, Yarden didn't feel like he was performing. When people asked who she was, he didn't flinch. When investors raised brows, he didn't explain. And when the press snapped a photo, he didn't let go of her hand. Later that night, after the last toast had been made and the music had softened into something slow and low, he led her to the rooftop garden. It was quiet there, just lanterns, ivy-wrapped trellises, and the distant hum of traffic below. He turned to her. "I've been thinking. That sounds dangerous. I want to build something that doesn't disappear. With me, with you." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "You don't even know what I look like in the morning. I'd like to. You've never seen me angry. I've seen you honest. That's enough. You don't know how I fall apart. I want to be there when you do." "You're not scared." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I've spent years being terrified of the wrong things. This isn't one of them." Elara touched the edge of his jacket. "What happens when we stop being new? Then we get to be real," he said. "And I'd rather have real with you than perfect with anyone else." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, soft and quiet, like she was searching for a flaw and struggling to find one that mattered. Then she kissed him. It wasn't rushed or desperate, it was steady, certain, like a decision. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered, "I think the woman in the field found where she belongs." Yarden took her hand and pressed it to his chest. So did the man who forgot how to feel anything. They stood there, wrapped in city breeze and lantern light, and for once there was no need for more words, no uncertainty, no waiting. He'd come to a wedding thinking he could endure it and disappear. Instead, he'd found the only person who made him want to stay. And this time, he wasn't letting go. Yarden stood in the driveway of Elara's cottage, the early spring breeze catching the edges of his coat. He didn't usually feel like this before a conversation uncertain. Toes curled slightly in his polished shoes, but the small velvet box in his pocket had a way of making everything else feel suddenly fragile. Inside, Elara was curled on the floor with a sketch pad resting against her knees. Her hair was messy, her sweatshirt oversized and speckled with graphite from the edge of her hand. The stereo played something soft and wordless while her pencil moved in short, deliberate strokes. When he knocked, she didn't look up. "It's open." He stepped in and closed the door behind him. "You always leave it unlocked." "Only when I know who's coming." He sat beside her, careful not to disturb the scattered sheets of paper. "What are you working on?" "It's a commission. A woman in Connecticut wants a portrait of her daughter holding a sunflower. She says it's the only flower the girl would ever stop to look at." He glanced at the sketch. The child's expression was quiet content. "It's beautiful. You say that about everything I make. Not true. I told you the ceramic mug shaped like a cat's head was mildly terrifying. I was experimenting with whimsy. You were experimenting with nightmares." She nudged his arm with her shoulder. "So what brings you here today? I thought you were in Boston this week." "I was. I came back early." She set the pencil down. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and held out the ring box without opening it. "I need to ask you something." Her eyes flicked to the box, then back to him. "You're not about to propose on the floor of my living room while I'm in Jim's socks, are you?" "I considered waiting," he said. "But then I realized I don't want to ask you in some grand ballroom with 100 people watching. I want to ask you here, where we're real." She stared at him, jaw tight. "This isn't a joke for you. I've never been more certain of anything, and I've made billion-dollar decisions." Her voice dropped. "You're serious. I want to wake up beside you every morning in whatever city, in whatever house, as long as it's with you." I want to be the first person you call when your painting sells or your plants die. I want all of it, even the parts that aren't easy." She reached for the box and opened it slowly. Inside sat a ring with a single emerald center stone surrounded by small, imperfect diamonds. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud, it was hers. "How did you know I liked green stones?" she whispered. "You once said emerald felt like the color of home." She blinked fast, but the tears still came. "You remember everything." "Only the important parts." Elara didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, "I think I've been waiting for someone to do exactly this, not just want me, but choose me with all the mess." "I want the mess, I want you." She slipped the ring onto her finger and let out a breath. "Then yes." He touched her cheek. "You're sure?" "I'm not scared anymore." He kissed her then, not with urgency but with a certainty that had grown between them like roots. When he pulled away, she leaned her forehead against his. "You know this means you have to live here at least part of the time," she said. "I already bought the cottage next door." Her eyes widened. "You what? You said you liked your space. I figured we could knock a hole in the fence and meet in the middle." She laughed, pressing her hand to his chest. "You're out of your mind." "I had to put an offer in fast." Apparently, it's a hot neighborhood. Months later, the garden between their cottages had been transformed into a shared space full of wildflowers, mismatched patio furniture, and a small greenhouse Elara insisted on building herself. Their wedding wasn't in a ballroom or a vineyard. It was in the backyard, with fairy lights strung between trees and their closest friends seated on hay bales covered in quilts. Her dress was simple and soft, his suit rumpled from kneeling in the grass to tie a child's shoe before the ceremony began. They danced under the stars to a song only they could hear, her head on his shoulder, his hand pressed firm against her back. When she whispered something into his ear, he laughed so hard he almost dropped her, and their guests clapped like they'd all been waiting years for this to happen. He never went back to the life he had before. Not entirely. Yarden still worked, but part-time now. He opened a branch of his firm in the nearby city and spent the rest of his time helping fund small local businesses. He stopped wearing suits unless Elara made him, and he learned how to plant tomatoes without killing them. She painted more, taught workshops on weekends, sold her work nationally but always signed her name the same way, a small green dot between the E and the L, for the color of home. On Sunday mornings, they sat on the porch with coffee and feet tangled, watching the sun rise over the trees. "You still think you're allergic to relaxing?" she asked one morning. He pulled her closer. "Only when you're not around." They never stopped choosing each other, not when it was easy. Not when it was inconvenient. Not even when the world tried to remind them who they used to be, because they knew now. They weren't who they'd been, they were who they became together.